Okay, so let's move along here. Let me see what time it is, because we're going to move into some interaction. So, of course, the topics make sense. Body awareness, this is quite repetitive and makes sense. And of course, we know that we should teach them about body parts and private and touching and all those topics. And this lady is going to show you how she does that. Now, watch her and watch the level of functioning the individuals have and the level of explicitness she uses with the diagrams. So that skill set we're now looking for in parents, teachers, professionals, service providers, and like with a magic wand, we just wave it and boom, we have it. There isn't really an acknowledgement yet in training and development, in post-secondary, in master's level prep. There isn't yet an acknowledgement of the gap in our learning when we're even in our undergraduate degrees, that this isn't being addressed. Because that's a pretty explicit diagram. It brings up feelings, and she's managed, the educator, to get beyond the feelings enough to be able to just use it as a tool. Now you'll notice the individual with challenges isn't shocked by the picture. And that's what I often find. What we are shocked by, they're just so grateful to be able to understand what it is and what they have. And these are some of the books that give that information. We're just going to talk, I'm going to say a little bit about social development, but this all makes sense because we look at greetings, eye contact. I use Michelle Garcia Winner's approach, and we don't really do eye contact. I ask them more to tell me what I'm looking at. So if I'm looking up there and I say to them, what am I looking at, and they don't know, then I'm aware that they're not reading faces at all. So if they can say the light, yes. What am I thinking about? The light. What am I thinking about? The bottle of water. What am I thinking about? The coat on the chair. What am I thinking about? Because wherever our eyes are, people assume that's what we're thinking about. So if I'm talking to you and I'm looking over here, do you feel like I'm thinking about you? No. So they learn that wherever you look, then somebody knows you're thinking about them. That's why we look in that direction. Because the eye contact thing starts to look kind of like this. We're like, oh, no, that's not quite the way. I'm listening. They're so cute. Okay, so romantic relationships, how to date, all those things, they want. And you'll notice that we're going to move through some of these because they are quite self-explanatory. That's just a YouTube clip. That's great. And they stood a certain distance apart. Because sometimes in our life skills classes, we make a rule like no touching. But that is just so artificial. It's a great idea, but we don't go through the day with zero touching. So that's a lot to ask of them. So if they know that they can do high five, which means they put up their hand, but if the other person doesn't put their hand up, it's not reciprocal. Don't be chasing them around with your high five hand or your fist pump hand. Okay? It's not reciprocal unless they put theirs up too, and that's the sign that you can do this. So there can be certain types of touch in the classroom, and there's certain rules about it, but it's very difficult for them to cope with no touching at all. It's just too artificial, because in the world, here's the other part. We say no touching. I noticed it in one of the schools I was in, but then every time we came up to the individual to talk with him, we touched him on his shoulder, to get his attention. So then once I realized that's not fair, because all day we can touch him, but he can't touch anybody. So we're not really building the skills for the environment that's needed. So let's pick touches that work. The practice of making friends, it's very self-explanatory and it's hard for them. And so sometimes they're gonna make sociosexual mistakes. And this is the key, and this is why we wanna be thinking about what happens if they do this behavior as an adult? And if it would be an issue legally, we must address it. Because what happens is the mistakes in their 15s turn into serious criminal charges in their 30s and their 20s. So, for example, kiddie porn. I was working with a gentleman, 22. He's just looking at jail from the age of 14. He's been trading nude children's pictures like people trade Pokemon cards. He's never talked to a child, never touched one, not interested in them, but he's been trading those pictures like Pokemon cards. And for his parents, their way of working with it was just praying about it. They didn't know what else to do. So nobody intervened anywhere. So now he's 22. He's got all these frames of child pornography. It's a year per frame. So he's looking at 20 years. And so now we're trying to advocate and test and everything to see how you can alter that, because he's considered a sex offender. But he's never even kissed a kid. But that's the world we live in now because of technology. So we must address it. Okay? And we'll be talking a bit more about public and private. So he can't figure out what the fuss is because he's just looking at the pictures. But I'm aware that he doesn't understand the concept of public and private, because if he truly understood it, he may get that those pictures are private and they're in a public domain. And the rules with public and private is that private things belong in private places, public things belong in public places, and they're not supposed to mix. So if we bring private things into public context, we get into trouble. People may laugh at us and think we're strange. That's why we don't urinate on the sidewalk at the mall. People try it, they get arrested. I had a client that got arrested. He didn't understand why until he realized that urinating is a private activity from a private part of the body that happens in a private place, unless you're camping. But don't put those in exceptions in when you're teaching them, because it gets too complicated. So just go with the conservative. But the sidewalk, see, there was nobody on the sidewalk at the time. So he thought it was a private place. Because here's a hard concept to get. When you're in a public place, you can be alone, but it doesn't make it private. We can be alone in a public place, but that does not make it private. That rule was missing. So he saw the sidewalk and there was nobody there. So he decided to urinate and the police came. He's 19. And when we talked about it, that sidewalk, how many people could that sidewalk hold at any given time? He said, well, anywhere from 0 to 100. Right. So because it could hold 100, that makes it a public space. And urinating, where do you do that? And he goes, don't be silly, it's private, I do it in private. Got it. So when you urinated on the sidewalk, you brought a private activity into a public space and you broke a social rule. It's like a basic social rule that nobody ever talks about or explains. But that social rule also works for swear words. Every swear word connects to something private, either sex or a part of the body or a private function. Which is why when we say it in a classroom, we get into trouble because we said it where there were a bunch of people. We broke the social rule. It applies to gestures, all kinds of things. So it becomes a very delicate conversation that can be used to correct behavior without leaving them feeling bad. Because it's a hidden social rule that they need to understand by the time they become adults, or they're limited in how social they can be. And then when we look at boundaries, well, there's so many. We think of personal space and things like that. But I had this one boy, he was 14, and every time he was in my office, and every time I went to my phone, he kept looking to see what the code was. Because he didn't know that kind of information is also something that requires a boundary. So when I said, can you figure out why you lose your friends or you don't have friends? No. What do you like to do? I like to hang out and play on their phones. And I said, oh, okay. And I gave him my phone. I said, well, what do you do? Well, in minutes, he got in. And he got in through my Facebook. And he was playing this game online. I get home. I start getting all these text messages. He spent $40 in 15 minutes. So when I came back, I said, this could affect your friendships. And then he was interested because he didn't know that he'd brought up a $40 bill on a teenager's phone by playing that game. So he needed to learn the boundaries around other people's phones. Even though he didn't have one, he still needed to learn it. Lots of boundaries. Urine protocol, bathroom safety. I found a video, I haven't uploaded it yet, on urinals and the rules around urinals. And here is what I learned about that. Women, we raise boys. Men raise men. We don't have the parts. We can't see that perspective. And they don't man up for us like they do for another man. So when he asked about, well, can I look at another boy's penis when I'm in the urinal? No, I don't think so. What are the rules about urinal behavior? I said, just a minute. And I went and found a man. male teachers, male role models to teach us both? I don't know. I don't even need to know. And even if I explain it as a woman, it's not the same thing as hearing it from a male role model. So the guys were kind of like, oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. Because there's lots of hidden rules. But I found a video, I haven't uploaded it yet, that actually tells you, like if you come in and one person's in this stall, don't do the next one, do the one over here, and all these rules. But then sometimes it changes. My brother came to the blues festival in Nanaimo, and the way they had the urinals set up, you ended up looking at each other. It was so weird, he said. That's weird. And then he said the other thing happened is kind of the other guy let out quite a and he said, sounds like a saxophone. Because he didn't know what else to say. So we need, boys need male mentors. Doesn't necessarily, they don't need to have a male living in the home. They need male mentors though. At school, in the community, whether they're on a team, in a club, it's really, really important. And I say that because if a man is raising a daughter, he doesn't even think twice about that he should have women around. But if a woman is raising a son, that doesn't cross her mind. Why? Why? It's really important, okay? I'm not saying it doesn't cross her mind, but often, and then the female perspective of the male perspective is not the male perspective. Thought I'd put that in too, because we're so sure. And sometimes people say, if you ask a man, what would a woman think? They go, I don't know, ask the woman. You ask a woman, what would a man think? And then we go on and answer the question. And the men are chuckling because they live in this. And they're humble enough to let us get away with it. Okay. So this says a bit about relationships, what's romantic, what's flirting. What are the rules? Stalking. A crush is one way. Somebody has a crush on somebody else. Like I could have a crush on Justin Bieber. I don't, but I could. But he doesn't know I'm alive. So a crush is only one way. It's not reciprocal. Reciprocity is when both people admit they like each other and both agree to spend time together. But a crush, and for many of our people with sensory challenges, a crush is so intense, they are so sure it's got to be reciprocal. They can't possibly just be holding all that within themselves. Right? All right. So there's a bit of stuff here about self-pleasure we're going to talk about after, because what I want to do now, we'll come back to that, okay, is I want to go to a vocabulary exercise. We're going back to the group rules. Anyone can pass. The more you involve yourself, the more you will learn, the more you will experience, and you have the room to pass. Use I messages when you speak, and speak for yourself, not anybody else, because they're not here to speak for themselves. There's no such thing as a dumb question, but I'm going to ask you not to give any personal or private questions or stories. When you come up to talk about a client, that's different, or your own child. No put downs, speak one at a time. Most important piece, everybody has a right to their own values, beliefs, and opinions. Today is not the day to change another's, but it is the day to embrace one's own.